In a bustling airport terminal, passengers hurriedly shuffled to their gates, the usual mix of pre-flight chaos. Among them was an older black woman, her graceful presence exuding wisdom and calm. She took her seat on the plane, ready for a journey she had likely taken many times before. Moments later, a young pilot walked by, his crisp uniform radiating authority. But instead of offering a courteous nod, he paused, and with a condescending tone, began lecturing her about flight etiquette. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. The woman, however, remained composed. With a steady voice and a knowing smile, she delivered a response that would not only leave the pilot speechless, but set the stage for an unforgettable moment. What happened next would shock everyone and leave a lasting impact on this flight crew's perspective forever. Stay tuned for this incredible story. As the pilot stood there, his words sharp and dismissive, the older woman remained calm. She listened patiently, her hands resting gracefully on her lap. To an outsider, it might have seemed like she was being polite, but those close enough to see her eyes would notice something else. A quiet strength, a wisdom born from years of experience. Passengers around her exchanged glances, some shifting uneasily in their seats. It was clear that many felt the pilot's tone was unnecessary, even disrespectful. Still, no one dared to intervene. The woman's silence seemed to unsettle him, and his words grew sharper as he attempted to assert his authority. But then she spoke. Her voice was steady, kind, but firm. What she said didn't just catch the pilot off guard. It made those nearby stop and listen. She wasn't just responding, she was teaching. Little did anyone know, her words were about to change everything. The woman's voice, calm but commanding, seemed to pierce through the tension in the cabin. She began to share a story, a personal account that immediately shifted the atmosphere. She spoke of her own experiences, decades ago, in a world where dignity and respect weren't always extended to people like her. The passengers listened intently, sensing there was more to this quiet traveler than met the eye. The pilot, now visibly uneasy, tried to interject, but she held her ground with grace. She wasn't confrontational, but her words carried weight. Slowly, the cabin began to feel less like an airplane and more like a gathering of strangers who were suddenly connected by her wisdom. Among the passengers, whispers spread. Some recognized her face but couldn't place where they had seen her before. Who was this woman? Why did her presence feel so powerful? And why did the pilot seem so shaken? The woman's words hung in the air like a challenge no one could ignore. She wasn't loud, but her steady tone commanded attention. The pilot, now visibly flustered, crossed his arms defensively, as if trying to shield himself from the weight of her quiet authority. His attempts to regain control faltered as passengers leaned in, captivated by the unfolding exchange. She spoke about respect, not just for titles or uniforms, but for humanity. Her words were directed solely at him. They felt like they were for everyone. People began to nod subtly, their initial discomfort giving way to quiet agreement. The tension in the cabin grew, not because of her, but because the balance of power had shifted. And then, as if by fate, a flight attendant approached, clearly uncomfortable, but with urgency in her voice. She handed the pilot something, a note or a message, and his face changed instantly. It was as if everything had come crashing down at once. What could it mean? The pilot's expression shifted as he read the note, his confident demeanor unraveling with each passing second. His face paled, his jaw tightening as if he was grappling with something he couldn't control. Passengers exchanged puzzled looks, their curiosity growing. Whatever was written on that piece of paper had shaken him deeply. The older woman, still composed, watched him carefully, her gaze calm but unyielding. It was as though she already knew what the message contained, or at least had an idea. The flight attendant, standing awkwardly nearby, avoided making eye contact with anyone, as though she too understood the gravity of the situation. Suddenly, the pilot straightened up, his attempt to regain composure only highlighting his inner turmoil. He opened his mouth to say something but stopped, his words catching in his throat. The passengers waited in tense silence, and then, without warning, the captain's voice came over the intercom. What he said left everyone stunned. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice was steady but carried a hint of tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "due to unforeseen circumstances, this flight will be delayed. We ask for your patience as we address this matter." The cabin erupted into murmurs, confusion spreading like wildfire. The pilot, now visibly rattled, stepped away quickly, leaving the note crumpled in his hand. The older woman remained calm, her serene expression untouched by the commotion. A few passengers whispered among themselves, wondering if she had something to do with the sudden change. It wasn't until security personnel quietly entered the plane that everything became clear. The twist hit like lightning. The note wasn't just an update. It revealed that the pilot himself was under investigation for a prior incident involving discriminatory behavior. The older woman, as it turned out, wasn't just a passenger. She was a retired aviation expert and advocate for fair treatment in the industry. Her presence wasn't coincidence, it was deliberate. The pilot, realizing the weight of his actions, avoided her gaze as he was escorted off the plane. The passengers watched in stunned silence, some even clapping softly as the tension finally broke. The woman sat back in her seat, a small, satisfied smile on her face. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability and respect. As the pilot disappeared down the aisle, the cabin settled into a hushed calm. Passengers exchanged astonished looks, some quietly discussing what they had just witnessed. The older woman remained composed, her presence still commanding respect without saying a word. It was clear that she had carried the weight of the situation with dignity and grace, ensuring the lesson was learned without unnecessary chaos. The flight crew worked quickly to address the delay, and soon a new pilot arrived to take command. He introduced himself warmly over the intercom, his voice reassuring and professional, immediately easing the tension. The passengers settled in, and the hum of the engines signaled that the journey would continue. As the plane began to taxi, a passenger seated nearby leaned over and spoke to the older woman. "Excuse me," she said softly, "but I have to ask, did you know this would happen?" The woman smiled, her eyes filled with wisdom. "Sometimes," she replied, "life gives you opportunities to make a difference. You just have to decide if you're ready to take them." She paused, her gaze drifting out the window. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by how you treat others. And sometimes reminding people of that can change everything. Her words seemed to resonate deeply with those who overheard, leaving them thoughtful. For the rest of the flight, the cabin had an air of quiet reflection. People were kinder to one another, offering smiles, helping with bags, and sharing small gestures that felt different than the usual rush of air travel. When the plane landed, there was a subtle but palpable sense of gratitude among the passengers. Many stopped to thank the older woman as they disembarked, some even sharing how her presence had inspired them. One passenger, a young woman who had been quietly observing the whole time, approached her last. "I just wanted to say, you reminded me today that standing up for what's right doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Thank you." The older woman nodded warmly, her smile gentle. "You'll find your own way to make a difference," she said. "We all have a role to play." As she exited the plane, the sunlight streaming through the airport windows seemed to frame her figure, adding a quiet sense of closure to the journey. She walked with purpose, her steps steady and confident. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread. Passengers shared their experiences online, praising the woman's quiet strength and how the situation had been handled. Her story became an example of how dignity and integrity can turn even the most uncomfortable moments into powerful lessons. For the pilot, the incident served as a turning point, forcing him to confront his own behavior and the consequences of his actions. For everyone else on that flight, it was a reminder that respect is universal, and sometimes the most powerful voices are the quietest ones. The story of that day stayed with them, a simple yet profound moment they would never forget.